The day I stood on that stage as valedictorian, in front of more than 2,000 people, I didn't see the lights. I didn't hear the first applause. The only thing I saw was my mother. She sat almost 20 rows back, her hands shaking as she clutched the program until it wrinkled. Next to her were my father and Victoria. But in the front row, the person I thanked with all my heart and my speech was Diane. When I said, "The woman who became my mother on the night I was abandoned," the entire hall stood up. Applause filled the room. Diane covered her face and cried. And in that moment, my biological mother finally understood something she refused to see 7 years ago. When she opened that door and sent me away, she didn't just lose a daughter. She lost the right to be called a mother. There were no accusations that day, only applause, and the heavy silence in the eyes of a woman who had just realized some choices can never be undone.
I was 15 when I realized I could be replaced in my own family. Victoria and I are twins, only 4 minutes apart. But those 4 minutes felt like an invisible distance that could never be closed. She came into the world first, healthy, rosy, celebrated. I arrived in silence, the cord wrapped around my neck. I almost didn't survive. Maybe from that moment on, my mother always saw me as something fragile and unnecessary. Victoria was the pride of the family. Her volleyball trophies filled the living room. She got new gifts every birthday. Our parents drove her everywhere. And me? I studied well. I had certificates, but they stayed quietly inside a drawer. When my mother introduced me, she would say only one sentence: "This is the other one." I learned to get used to being ignored. I learned to stay silent at family dinners. I learned not to expect. I told myself, just 3 more years. Go to college. Leave that house. Be free. I didn't know May 12th would come before I had the chance to leave.
On May 12th, I came home around 7 p.m. after debate practice. The door opened, and the air in the kitchen felt thick. Victoria was sitting there, eyes red. My mother was pacing. My father stood with his arms crossed, his gaze so cold my stomach tightened. "Maya, we need to talk." A small bag of white powder was placed on the table, a plastic bag, and the way they looked at me, like I was a stranger. "We found this in your room." I froze. I had never touched drugs, but every word I tried to say was cut off. Victoria said I stole her bracelet, sold it to buy that. They said they found $240 in my drawer, money I had saved for a laptop for college. I turned to look at her. Just one sentence. Just one truth. That's all it would take. But she looked down and cried, and my mother held her like I was the danger. "Pack your things. You're not staying here tonight." I thought I misheard. I was 15, but my father was already opening the door. My mother didn't look at me. No one asked where I would go. No one asked if I'd be cold. I stood on the sidewalk with a backpack, watching the lights inside the house still on, watching my family, just without me in it. Some kids are kicked out because they made a mistake, but some are pushed out because adults choose to believe the child they want to believe. If you've ever been misunderstood so deeply no one would listen, type 1 below. Not to complain, but to remind yourself you are never alone outside that door.
If you only look from the outside, everyone would think Victoria was the lucky one, more loved, more protected, trusted completely. But that same favoritism quietly planted something toxic inside her. When a child is always placed on a pedestal, they don't have to try to be accepted, but they also never feel sure if their worth is real. Victoria had the glow of being the perfect child, but that light only existed through our parents' eyes, not her own. I was different. I grew up in the shadow of comparison, less expected, less noticed. I learned to figure things out on my own. I read alone, set my own goals. I didn't need applause to know I was doing well. And maybe that was what made Victoria uncomfortable. Because when everything she had came from favoritism, my quiet existence, still studying well, still having direction, still calm without competing, became a threat. Not because I was better, but because I didn't need what she depended on. I used to think, you already have everything. Why are you jealous? But later, I understood. The child who is loved unfairly is not always the happiest one. They live in fear. Fear of losing their place. Fear of being replaced. Fear that one day their parents will see the other child is enough too. And when that fear becomes stronger than self-respect, people start doing things they can't undo. Victoria didn't lie in a moment of impulse. She planned it. She hid the money in my room, put the powder in my drawer, made up the story about the bracelet, which means in her mind, I was no longer her sister. I was her rival. But the thing that hurt me most wasn't her betrayal. It was my parents' blindness. They didn't question, didn't investigate, didn't ask how I could prove myself. They saw the evidence and then saw me through a lens they had built for 15 years, the other one. When parents choose to believe the child they want to believe, truth no longer matters. When a family already has a perfect child, the other one doesn't even need to make a mistake to become the sacrifice. Favoritism is not loud. It lives in small things: dinner conversations, gifts, questions asked to one child and not the other. But over time, it becomes a broken system of belief. And in that system, I was wrong before I even spoke. That night, standing outside the house, I realized something painful. They didn't hate me. They just never really saw me. And when you are not seen, you can be erased. That's the cruelest psychological pattern in a biased family. One child is overprotected until they lose their identity. Another child is ignored until they learn to survive alone. And when those two paths collide, the result is not conflict, it's collapse. Victoria acted out of insecurity. My parents decided out of bias. And I was the one who carried the consequences. But here's the paradox. The moment I was erased from my family was the moment I began to truly exist. Because when no one believes you, you are forced to believe in yourself. And when you no longer belong to the old place, you get a chance to build your life again from the ground up. I didn't understand that at 15. That night, I only felt cold, betrayed, like I wasn't worth enough to be heard. But years later, I understood. The problem was never me. The problem was a family that chose favoritism over fairness, emotion over truth, and protecting the image of a perfect child over protecting both of their children. And the price of that choice was losing both. I sat on the sidewalk in front of my house for 4 hours. May in Vancouver isn't freezing. But when you've just been kicked out, the cold is not in the air. It's in the feeling that you no longer belong anywhere. I held my backpack close to my chest, staring through the living room window. The lights were still on. My mother pulled the curtains shut. Her shadow passed across the glass and disappeared. A while later, the kitchen light went out. Only Victoria's room was still lit. I wondered if she felt guilty, or she was texting someone, telling her version of the story. My phone buzzed. "I'm sorry. I didn't think they'd kick you out. Where are you?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Just one message. No confession. No truth. Just, I didn't think it would go this far. I blocked her number. At 7:50 p.m., I called the only person I could think of, Diane. The moment I heard her voice, I broke. I told her everything through sobs. The white powder, the $240, the door slamming shut. She didn't interrupt. She only said 3 words. "I believe you." Those 3 words made me cry harder than when I was kicked out. "Where are you?" "Outside the house." "Don't go anywhere." "I'm in Kelowna. I'll drive down. About 4 hours." 4 hours. I sat under the yellow streetlight, listening to music like she told me, so my mind wouldn't fall apart. Every car that passed, I looked up. Not out of fear, but hope. 11:47 p.m. A familiar car stopped in front of me. She stepped out. Didn't ask anything. Didn't judge. She just held me tight in the quiet street. "It's okay. I'm here now." Her house was small, near the lake, smelling like coffee and dog fur. Murphy ran to me, wagging his tail like I had never been abandoned. She set up the sofa bed in her office, left clean towels in the bathroom, made chamomile tea at midnight. We sat at the kitchen table. Murphy rested his head on my lap. "I'll ask once," she said softly. "Did you do it?" "No." "Then that's enough." No interrogation. No doubt. Just belief. The next morning, she started making calls. To my school, to a lawyer, to child services. And she said something I had never heard from my parents. No one gets to throw this child away. The weeks after were paperwork, meetings, legal arguments. My parents resisted for a while. Then they stopped. Maybe because if they didn't, they would have to admit they threw their 15-year-old daughter out, based on an unverified accusation. 3 weeks later, they signed over guardianship. I never went back to that house. At school, things weren't easy. Victoria told her story first, that I was addicted, that my parents tried to help me, but I refused. Some people believed her. The rest kept their distance. I stopped explaining. I didn't need everyone to believe me. I only needed one person. And I had her.
3 years after the night I was kicked out, when I had already learned to live without them, Victoria called me. Unknown number. I almost hung up, but something made me answer. "I need to see you. Just 1 hour." We met at a crowded cafe in Vancouver. I chose a seat facing the door, a habit of self-protection. Victoria walked in, thinner than before. The volleyball hoodie that once made our parents proud now hung loose on her body, dark circles under her eyes, her hands shaking slightly as she held her latte. We said nothing for almost a full minute. Then she spoke. That night, I lied. I wasn't surprised. I had always known. But hearing it from her mouth still felt like a punch to my chest. "I hid the money in your room. I put the drugs in your drawer. The bracelet. I sold it." I looked at her. Didn't blink. "Why?" because I was jealous. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it made no sense. You had everything. I had attention, she said quietly, but you had yourself. You didn't need anyone's approval. You knew who you were. I didn't. She said she regretted it every single day, that she was in therapy now, that her therapist told her she had to tell the truth. I told Mom and Dad last week. My heart paused. What did they say? They didn't believe me at first. Dad even said maybe I was covering for you. I laughed again. This time it tasted bitter. 3 years. 3 years of being labeled a thief, an addict. 3 years without a single call to ask if I was okay. And when the truth came out, their first instinct was still to protect the old story. They want to see you, Victoria said. They want to apologize. Start over. I shook my head. No. They're our parents. The night they opened that door and sent me out, they already chose. Victoria cried. This time, not pretending. I could see real regret, but regret doesn't turn back time. I've forgiven, I said slowly. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be able to live in peace now. She looked up. Then why not give them a chance? Because forgiveness doesn't mean going back. Forgiveness means I move forward. Not that I reopened the door. For people who once pushed me out. We sat in silence for a while. And me? She whispered. Can you forgive me? I looked at her. My twin sister. The person who once shared the same heartbeat with me before we were born. Maybe one day, I said, but not today. I stood up, walked out of the cafe. This time, I wasn't the girl who was pushed out. I was the one who chose to leave.
After that meeting, I didn't feel relieved right away. There was no dramatic reunion, no tears, no miracle healing, only a quiet kind of clarity. I understood something important. I was no longer that 15-year-old girl sitting on the sidewalk, waiting to be saved. I was someone who could decide who gets to be part of my life. I used to think forgiveness meant going back, giving another chance, proving I was kind enough. But living with Diane taught me something different. Forgiveness is so your heart is no longer poisoned. Boundaries are so your wounds don't get reopened. Victoria told the truth. My parents knew they were wrong. But truth doesn't erase 7 years. It doesn't erase the nights I questioned myself. It doesn't erase the cold look in my father's eyes when he held the door open and said, "Not our problem anymore." Some relationships don't break because there was no apology. They break because trust is gone. I'm not angry at them anymore. That surprised me the most. I just don't need them anymore. I started to see family differently. Family is not who gave birth to you. Family is the person who drives 4 hours in the night because you're crying on the street. It's the person who puts your achievements on the fridge. The one who asks, "How was your day?" and waits for your answer. I realized I didn't lose a family. I just redefined it. And for the first time in my life, I felt peace saying, I choose this life. I didn't look back at them anymore. I went home. My home. The one that smells like morning coffee and Murphy's paws tapping across the wooden floor. And I did the only thing I knew how to do best. I studied. I threw myself into studying like it was the only way to prove I existed. Debate, advanced classes, research. I chose criminology as my major, psychology as my minor. Not by accident. I wanted to understand.
why people betray, why families can push their own child away, why truth sometimes loses to emotion. I studied wrongful convictions, false testimonies, how bias makes people ignore evidence. And every time I read, I saw my 15-year-old self in those pages. Someone judged before being heard. I made the honor roll every semester. I earned scholarships. I became a research assistant for a professor specializing in wrongful convictions. On weekends, I volunteered at a youth center. Kids who had been kicked out, labeled problems. When I sat across from them, I didn't tell my story. I only said, "I believe you," because I know those 3 words can save a person. My life didn't become successful to prove they were wrong. It became successful because I stopped living for their approval. I built everything, not to go back, but to move forward. And with every step I took, I became stronger than the last.
On graduation day, when I stepped onto the stage as valedictorian, I didn't shake. I had already survived things far more frightening. I spoke about my journey, about being abandoned, about learning to stand on my own, about family, not the one I was born into, but the one that chose to stay. Then I looked down at the front row. Diane was sitting there, her hands clasped together, her eyes already filled with tears. Murphy was allowed inside with his support badge, lying quietly at her feet. When I said, there was someone who became my mother on the night I had nowhere left to go, the room began to applaud. I paused. When I think about the word family, I think of my aunt, the woman who showed me that family is not DNA. Family is a choice. The applause started soft, then spread. People stood up. I looked toward the middle of the hall. My mother was crying, her hands shaking so much she dropped the program onto the floor. For the first time, they understood. But this time, I didn't need them to. That night, after graduation, I lay in the room Diane had prepared for me 7 years ago. Everything was still the same. The warm blanket, the small desk, and the kind of peace I once thought I didn't deserve. I thought about the 15-year-old girl curled up on the sidewalk, believing her life was over. But it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 7 years later, I am no longer the girl who was abandoned. I have a career I love, a mother who chose me, and a life built on my own worth. I don't need recognition from people who turned away. I only need to know that I stayed true to myself. I don't hate them. I don't need them to understand. I simply move forward, lighter, stronger, whole. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere, type 1 below to remind yourself that sometimes losing a family is not the end, but the beginning of finding the one that's truly yours.